Okay, hi. Are we actually gonna do this right now? Yeah, we should probably just do this right now. So I am speaking in hushed tones and adjusting my camera only now because I have decided to film a video, and if you're wondering why I just pulled these headphones out, it's because I was just listening to a wrap-up of somebody and I realized that it is the first day of October and I have filmed neither my August nor September wrap-up. So we're gonna be doing that today and I'm speaking to you in hushed tones. It's 1 a.m. There you go. And it occurred to me that I should probably film a wrap-up. So today we're gonna be talking about some books that I read in August and September. I read quite a lot and I don't necessarily feel like talking about everything that I read. If you saw my July wrap-up, which I also filmed very late, you will see that I reviewed 20 books in the span of 30 minutes. Now, although that video got a lot of views, and thank you very much for that, it was excruciating to film. I get really bored talking about lists, you know, like I get really bored talking about I read this book, I read this book, I read this book. So to do that for 20 books was just not a fun time for me. So I am gonna only talk about the books that I actually care to talk about, okay? So in August and September, I read 26 books altogether, and I'm only gonna talk about a few, and I am not prepared. So here's the thing, I put up a poll on my Instagram asking you to vote for which video you wanted to see next, and y'all voted for books that made me cry. I have the stack of books that made me cry over here. The reason I'm not filming that video yet, but I will film it soon, is because the house was pretty active today, so I had to wait till very late to film a video, and my dad went to sleep, so I have to like speak in hushed tones. And when I film this video that a lot of people requested, I want to be like, I want to be alive, I want to be present in my entire being, but right now I can't do that. So instead I'm gonna cram a wrap-up, story of my life. There's gonna be no script. It's gonna be absolutely terrible, and I apologize in advance. And I barely remember anybody's name in any book, but we're gonna push through, okay? We got this. We got this. I got this. We're fine. Okay, we're fine. So the first book I read in August is Yes, Daddy by Jonathan Parks Ramage. And this is a book that completely took me by surprise. We basically follow this young man who is broke and he is an entitled piece of shit. He constantly drains his parents of their finances, and he is spending money in New York and is like purposely buying expensive clothes so he can show people that he's worth something, even though he's basically living from paycheck to paycheck from his parents. And one night he decides to seduce this much older man who is this like wealthy playwright, I believe, and a romance ensues, and it is the most abusive thing ever. So I gave this book 4.5 stars, and that rating comes from the fact that I was completely taken by surprise. By this I mean, I went in expecting a trashy erotic thriller given the title, given the cover. I mean, Yes, Daddy. I thought this was gonna be some Brian De Palma kind of movie where there's like lots of sex and there's killing and people end up dead. But what this book ended up actually being was a story about forgiveness and redemption, and it is a love story, but in the way Frozen is a love story. Like, people rekindle their relationships from the past, and it is so well written and so incredible, honestly. I feel like this title is very deceptive. A lot of people are gonna go in expecting one thing and end up getting something else, which is quite unfortunate. Like myself, for a while I was very disappointed. I was like, am I gonna give this 1 star? What is this crap? But by the end, I was very impressed, and I would highly recommend it if you are looking for stories that resemble ones from the Me Too movement, because, there are male victims also, and this story tells the tale of male victims and their relationships with their abusers, and the kinds of pasts they come from and how they reconcile with that. And it's just so good, and I'm gonna shut up now because I have a bunch of other books to talk about. And then afterward, I read In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami, and this is the second Ryu Murakami book I read. The first one I read was Audition by him, and I read that for Summerween. and this one was not as incredible, but I loved it nonetheless. This is a Japanese book and it was translated to English, so it is a translated work, and we basically follow this young man who is Japanese and he works as a tour guide on the side, and he tours around foreigners visiting Japan. Except he doesn't show them temples and shrines and stuff. No, he is a tour guide in the Japanese red light district. Now, here's the thing. He suspects that the person who he is tour guiding that night is the same person who is responsible for a string of deaths that has been happening in that area. And this book is so good. I didn't love it like I loved Audition, but I was riveted all throughout. The guy he's tour guiding is a middle-aged American man, and the way we learn about Japanese culture and American culture and how various cultures converge and diverge is very well done. The dialogue is riveting. Although this is a disturbing book with murder and very lurid and lots of gore, this is gonna disappoint you if you're going in looking for torture porn. Like, this is not that. There are scenes that have that, but this book reminded me a lot of the film Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight. It reminded me of that. It takes place in a very small span of time and is very dialogue heavy, very mysterious. The story is told through conversations that these two people have, and it is genuinely quite disturbing, but also very riveting and insightful and really good. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend this and Audition. I would recommend you read both because they are quite incredible. And then after In the Miso Soup, I read two books that were among the most disturbing books I have ever read in my entire life. The first one being The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. Now, this book was disturbing in the sense that it was based on true events. So if you are familiar with the murder of this young girl named Sylvia Likens, this book was based on that. And a lot of the things that happen in this book, and I know this because I did research on the actual case, a lot of the things that happen in real life happen in this book. So that alone makes this incredibly disturbing, and this is a very difficult read. I gave this book 4 stars, and the reason I rated it so high is because it's not titillating, like it doesn't go overboard. And the way Jack Ketchum does this is that he makes the protagonist one of the neighborhood boys. So basically we follow somebody who sees the events happening to this girl. There's a certain detachment to the brutality of the story, but we do play the role essentially of a fly on the wall. It is incredibly disturbing. There is some foreshadowing from the beginning of the story that tells you what kind of things these kids are going to be doing to her. So for those of you who don't know what this book is about or are unfamiliar with the original case, we follow these 2 young girls whose parents died and were taken in by their aunt, and the aunt is an abusive bitch who basically let all the neighborhood boys torture this young girl in a basement for like some months until she died. And what makes this book most effective is that the first 100 pages are us getting to know the characters. The disturbing stuff doesn't happen until well into the second act of the book, but when it does happen, we know these people as human beings, and he really humanizes the victims of this murder, and it's just so good, but not for the faint of heart. Like, please know what you're getting into before you choose to read this book, and if you DNF it, I don't blame you. The second super disturbing book I read, which qualifies as one of the most disturbing books I have ever read in my entire life, is The Summer I Died by Ryan C. Thomas. Now, this book was a lot. This is probably tied with Cows as most graphically disturbing book I have ever read. I was reading certain portions with splayed fingers like this. I would say that this is more disturbing than Cows, because while Cows is very absurd and it's like, what the hell? This book actually spends a lot of time, similar to Girl Next Door, getting you to care for the characters. We follow this guy named Roger and his friend Tooth. They spend this summer together, and one day while they are exploring the woods, they hear a woman screaming in distress, and so they search for her, they find her, and they find out why she is screaming. From that point on until the literal last page is some of the most psychotic, disgusting torture I have ever read. There is no way they can turn this into a film. I don't know who the hell the target market of this book would be. This entire thing takes place from the point of Roger, and we really feel like we are him, in the situation. Every single thing that happens is just so sick and disturbing, and you can smell the basement that they're in. You can hear the sounds of limbs getting chopped up. You can hear the screaming in the room with you. Like, Ryan C. Thomas writes it so well that you can feel everything happening. Like, I started sweating while reading this book, and it was very cold while I was reading it. So I don't know if I would recommend this to anyone. I personally gave it 4 stars because I'm the kind of person who, when I'm very depressed, I read horror books to make me feel better. I know that sounds probably really sick, but I was very depressed. Like, you know, my mental health was kind of bad, and this book was one of the books that like brightened up my day. Yeah, I know that sounds terrible. I'm gonna die alone. I'm gonna be single forever. I don't really give a fuck. I've kind of like accepted it anyway. After that, I'm gonna skip that one. After that, I read A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 3rd book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and I loved this book so much. I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it so much. Obviously, I can't say what the plot is because that would constitute as spoilers, because this is the 3rd book in a series. But basically, it is a final battle, and there is a war, and we follow Feyre right after the events of A Court of Mist and Ruin. A Court of Mist, I keep messing the names up. We follow her right after A Court of Mist and Fury, and you know that she was like doing some espionage, right? Like, she was like spying on the other team, but she was on somebody else's team, and her spying is so good, and she has gotten so much better at combat, and the action scenes are so much fun when they were on the ice. And this isn't a spoiler, I'm not gonna say who lives, who dies, whatever, but the scene when they were on the ice and Eris was chasing them and Feyre was like winnowing. Ugh, it was so good. And Feyre was just so good in this book. I loved her so much. As some of you know, I absolutely hated the 1st book because she was just so annoying and useless. But in this book, she was just so, I loved her so much. Like, I swear, she was just so cool and so badass and epic and amazing. And so yeah, I gave it 5 stars because I just loved it so much, and Sarah J. Maas is a queen. Afterward, however, I read A Court of Frost and Starlight, which was so disappointing. When I was writing my review on Bookstagram, I talked about how in Japanese films of older directors like Akira Kurosawa, they have this thing called a pillow shot, which resembles breaks in Japanese poetry, when you have a scene and then he cuts to something insignificant like a vase or the outside of a house or a store outside the house, and that scene allows you to reflect on the scene that you had just seen. So I assume that that was what Sarah J. Maas was going for, but literally it was just so annoying following them during the winter solstice and seeing what presents they were buying one another. I was just so bored. I was not happy. Even though I got to spend time with characters I liked, that was not enough for this content to be worthy of a hardcover book that was released in bookstores. It just does not cut it. It doesn't make the cut. I mean, there are so many indie authors that write incredible books that have a very hard time publishing. I don't know why this was published. The only reason this book was published was because the name Sarah J. Maas, who I love, was on the cover, and that's honestly kind of tragic. So the next book is one that I am so excited to talk about because I normally read audiobooks, but I read this entire book with my eyes, and that is all 800 pages of A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I cannot even begin to put into words how much this book means to me, how much I love this book. I love this book with my entire heart, okay? Although I loved Feyre and Rhysand, I saw so much of myself in Nesta fucking Archeron. I felt so seen. My thoughts are very raw, but I would honestly love to do a whole video just on this book. Like, even if you want spoilers, I can do spoilers. I want to talk about every single scene. I want to talk about every single thing I loved about it. I want to just talk about this. If we ever meet in person, do not ask me about this book because I will ramble for hours and hours and hours about how wowed I was by it. I should probably tell you what this book is about. So this book takes place after A Court of Frost and Starlight, after the winter solstice, and the protagonist changes. So unlike the last book with Feyre and Rhysand, we now follow Nesta and Cassian. Though where this book differs from the rest of the books is that we actually do get some chapters from Cassian, which really helped with this story because sometimes Nesta is on a mission and then we don't know what she is up to, and then we see Cassian being afraid of what she could potentially be going through, whether she is in danger or not. And there are so many good scenes. The scene with this mask on this cover is so epic. I was at first a bit meh with the cover change because the ACOTAR covers are quite nice and they kind of remind me of the Throne of Glass covers with the main character on the cover. So the fact that it was just a plain cover was quite curious. But now that I have read this book, I can tell why they had to rebrand, because this is an adult book through and through. There is so much sexual sexing happening in this book. I'm so used to books of this nature cutting to black, but in this book we are there from the kiss to the cleanup, if you catch my drift. Details. There are details. There are positions. There are moans. There are sounds. There is verbiage during the act. There are commands made. There is something done in a dining table where everybody in the house eats. I will not go into details. Learning about Nesta and why she is the way she is, learning about her guilt, learning about her emotional turmoil, learning about her relationship with her family members. A lot of people thought that she was a bitch, myself included, but when we get to hear her side of the story, it is so, I don't know, I related so hard. I think Sarah J. Maas opened up my skull and analyzed my mind and was like, oh, this is who you are? I'm gonna take this Virgo sun and Libra moon energy and scoop it all up out of your head and put it all in this character that you thought you disliked but are actually almost the same person as, and I just love it with my entire being. I should probably talk about another book right now. So the next book I read is one that I actually have a physical copy of, and I'm gonna go get it now. Okay, so I actually planned on doing a full video on this book, just ripping it apart, because I've actually never read this book before, although I've seen the films that this book is based on. I don't know if I have the energy to do a full video on this, and that book is Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. I read this entire book, all of it. As you can tell, this is a very old copy. I mean, I really don't need to get into it. It was absolute fucking garbage. I hated it so much. I have literal complaints on every single page. I was under the impression that I would read this book and then have several little things to say here and there, but I literally have complaints on every single page of this near 500-page book, and I don't know if I want to film a 4-hour video on this thing. I don't know how I'm gonna go about reviewing this. That should tell you enough for this review, so I'm just not even gonna talk about it, okay? If you want to see a full video on this book that I am gonna struggle to do, but I will do if you want it, comment down below, message me on Bookstagram. Instagram will be linked down below also in case you wanna talk to me there. I'm done talking about this book now, okay? So I was feeling very nostalgic these months, so I reread all 13 a series of Unfortunate Events books by Lemony Snicket, and I have a couple that I want to show you over here. This is book number 1. This is the book that started it all. These are the first books I ever read in my life. I read my first novel at the age of 8, and it was these books. I have such love for it. I love the way Lemony Snicket writes. I love his humor. I love how at a young age I was made privy to what good writing sounded like. I love how he would put in big words and then define them in a very funny way in the context of the story. I love how cynical the tone was, because I am a huge pessimist. I think that probably comes with being a Virgo. I am a full-on glass half empty. The world is evil. We don't need to mourn its loss. Love is dead. Life sucks. Everything's gonna suck. Let's just do the best we can. I'm that kind of person. And this series just spoke to my soul in a way that didn't speak to me when I was a kid, but I fell in love with this series all over again. Another thing that I love the most is that this book has such disdain for authority. Every single authority figure is someone that the kids stick it to. I just love that so much because I, as a kid, always got in trouble with authority. Like in school, I would tell jokes that would get me sent to detention because they were like too vulgar, and I would just rebel. Like, I mean, I was very effeminate as a child, which was called out, but I didn't give a fuck. And just like literally everything that people told me I should be, I was like, fuck you, you're an idiot, I'm gonna do what I want. And this book had that same energy as a kid. That energy carried me out through life, and just re-witnessing that energy now as an adult was so humbling and beautiful and fantastic. I live for it. I just love Violet, Klaus, and Sunny, just their unique characteristics, like Violet being the inventor, Klaus being the bookworm, and Sunny being the muscles of the team, the jaws of the team. I just love these characters so much. And you know, I actually have not yet seen the Netflix show, so I think I need to get on that soon at some point. So this was the book that started it all. Actually, book 3, The Wide Window, started it all because I read this series out of order. But book 1 is important because without book 1, we would not have this series. My least favorite book in the series would probably be book 5 because there wasn't as much of a catharsis in this book, and it was just really annoying. I hated Carmelita, I hated this principal, and I was just like so mad reading this book. And my favorite book of the series would probably be The Miserable Mill, because this was the funniest one by far, with the hypnotist, eye doctor Georgina Orwell. Can you imagine the amount of stuff that flies over your head as a kid? Georgina Orwell, and then the eye, like the giant eye on her building establishment, whatever. It was just so funny. I loved it so much. I don't plan on having kids, so I'm never gonna read this to anyone, but if I am ever an uncle one day, I will know how to keep the kiddies entertained, and I will make more people readers. That should be all of your missions, okay? We need to save the bookstores. Love this series so much. So then I read a bunch of non-fiction books that I honestly don't really feel like talking about, so I'm just gonna skip those. And then a couple of other books that I'm gonna skip. And then I read a thriller called Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica, and I read this for my book club. So I actually quite liked this book, even though I sounded like I had mixed feelings on the book club discussion. Although it was not perfect, it was quite far from perfect, I did really like the twists. Basically, we follow this young girl named Delilah who goes missing when she is a kid. Some years later, she manages to escape her kidnappers and find her way back into this town, and her return to this town unravels the entire facade of normalcy that the town had had, and secrets from neighbors and other people living in the town start coming out, and it's just so juicy. And the story takes place from both the past and the present, so we get to see what happened, who the key players are, we get to see the mystery unravel like a puzzle piece, and it's super fun. It doesn't really have much to say in terms of, you know, theme or things like that, but it's really fun, and I had a blast reading it, and I think you will too if we share the same taste. And yeah, those are all the books that I'm honestly willing to talk about right now. This was unscripted. I am sorry if I rambled. I'm gonna try to edit this video into something watchable. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did enjoy this, please like and comment and subscribe. Share this video with your friends, and I will love you forever. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in future videos, but until then, take care.